David Rees, down number 5 on the debate. Galwr aelodau.
I call members to order, and the first item on our agenda is questions to the Cabinet Secretary for Energy Planning and Rural Affairs. And the first question is from Rhina Bjorwerth. Thank you, Llywydd. What plans does the Welsh Government have to promote Anglesy's food and drink industry?
We are promoting our food and drink industry across the UK and globally, using growth businesses such as Hannah Mon as a brand ambassador and showcasing Dillon's restaurants' new retail products. This, with support for Anglesy's food festivals, demonstrates a comprehensive promotion of Anglesy's excellent food and drink.
Thank you very much, Minister. I am aware that you visited Prep Kitchen, the Dylan's Prep Kitchen in Llangefni at the end of last week, and I'm certainly very proud of the economic development that has followed the growth of the Dylan's business, which has now become a well-known brand across the northwest of Wales over the past few years. But that site that you visited is a site that wasn't built for Dylan's, but it was a development of a site which was built on spec where Dylan's has actually developed its own business. Now, I've raised with you in the past the need for sites and premises which are appropriate for food production on Anglesey, so that other companies on the island can have somewhere where they can go to develop and to employ more people. Now, I have been given some positive signals from you in the past, but to date there have been no developments. But can you confirm that you are still supportive of the principle and give me an update on any steps that the government is taking or could take in order to ensure that that premises is available for food production companies on Anglesey so they can develop and grow?
Thank you. You're quite right. I did attend the Prep Kitchen for Dillon's restaurant in Llangefni. I also went to the restaurant in Menai Bridge and sampled some fantastic local seafood. I noticed on that site in Llangefni there were also other companies, food companies, but as you say, it wasn't built specifically for that. And I'm obviously well aware that we met, I think it was probably about this time last year, when you brought forward the sort of suggestion about making Anglesey a hub, and I'm still very keen to do that, to have a sort of national food and drink hub to respond to the opportunities, particularly from the major infrastructures we've got across North Wales. And as you said yourself, you know, food and Anglesey is renowned for its food and drink, not just for the couple of companies that we've mentioned. We've obviously got Food Innovation Wales also based in Llangefni. We obviously back them along with the other two centres across Wales, and they are a key strategic partner. I've also met with the local FE college to discuss what they're doing around food preparation. So it is something that we're continuing to look at. And if you want to meet with me again for an update, I'd be very happy to do that.
Mark Isherwood.
Thank you. We've been in correspondence over recent months on behalf of an Anglesey farmer, a lamb producer, who's highlighted the potential for Welsh lamb exports in particularly Saudi Arabia. He's also previously worked for the Meat Hygiene Service. He says the Saudis are far more interested in quality Welsh lamb carcasses than cuts, and clearly this also has implications for the importance of extending shelf life. But when he attended a Farming Connect meeting in June, the presentation by HCC on exports to Saudi Arabia made no reference to Saudi culture, where they like taking whole lamb carcasses out to the desert to cook. In one of your replies to me, you said some red meat processors in Wales who export to distant markets are able to achieve a shelf life of 42 days for Welsh lamb products. But when I chased that up, you confirmed that only the Rheg estate in Corwin is currently able to achieve that 42-day figure. Noting that the DEFRA has written to me saying that they're working with the Saudi Food and Drink Authority with a view of gaining market access for UK lamb, what engagement are you having, not only in that engagement with DEFRA and the Saudis, but to ensure that Welsh lamb is able to meet the time period and the whole carcass needs, which will drive access to Saudi Arabia and similar parts of the world.
You raised several important points. Obviously, shelf life is something we're having to look at very carefully, particularly in light of Brexit. You'll be aware that a third of Welsh lamb currently is exported to the EU. So, even with all the uncertainty around that, we are having to look at new markets. And obviously, the Middle East is one area that we are looking at, and certainly my officials too are engaged in relation to that. At carcasses, you're quite right. Again, we are looking at the whole of an animal. I think it's very important that, that these conversations are held. I was talking with a company at the Winter Fair on Monday around carcasses also, because as you say, it is something that the Saudi culture likes to have. So I just want to assure you that those conversations are ongoing with my officials at the current time.
Cwestiwn 2, Gareth.
Question 2, Gareth Bennett.
Diolch, Llywydd. What discussions has the Cabinet Secretary had with Natural Resources Wales about the tree felling programme at Forest Fawr in Tongwynlais?
Responsibility for the Welsh Government woodland estate rests with National Resources Wales. I'm aware that large trees infected with Biperamorum are being felled at Forest Fawr, and Natural Resources Wales is managing this essential work. Peramorum is the most serious tree disease problem to affected forests in Wales.
Thanks, Minister, for your response. Forest Fawr is a well-used local walking area next to Castell Coch. Many locals are worried that NRW doesn't have any plan to replant the area following the culling. There is a campaign which has been launched calling for a replanting programme. Could I ask you to consult with NRW to ascertain what more might be done about the replanting?
Thank you for your question. I'm aware that there is a campaign and a petition has been launched. Natural Resources Wales are monitoring the situation and trying to go for the option of the best option is natural regeneration. But this doesn't happen. They will look at other ways of restocking the tree population at Forest Fawr.
Julie Morgan.
Diolch. I know that a public meeting was held in Tongwynlais, which was well attended, and that NRW did make a convincing case for the natural regeneration of the woodland, and I believe that the people who attended the meeting were satisfied. But I think it is important, as the Minister has said, that if there fails to be natural regeneration, that then they should reconsider whether any trees should be planted.
Thank you. And I know thank you to the member for Cardiff North for your question. I know that you work very diligently day in, day out on behalf of your constituents, and I'm sure you will monitor this situation as I will be doing too. And after the harvesting has taken place, NRW will encourage native species such as beech, oak, birch, wild cherry, rowan and hazel in the forest to naturally regenerate. But as it will also monitor the regeneration in the forest before considering any to keep the local community updated with any developments.
David Melding.
Can I welcome the Minister to her new responsibilities and wish her well with them? Can I echo what the other members have said? This is such an important site in South Wales. It's so popular, both in its own right, but also in its close proximity to Castell Coch. I think the key thing is after 2 or 3 years, there's a proper assessment, and all the people that have been concerned, all the community groups, are given that information so they can see it, and then we can all be assured that either natural regeneration has worked or is working, or it needs to be supplemented, or a new approach has to be taken.
Absolutely, and as I said to previous members that in previous questions, that Natural Resources will monitor that, and I will expect them to keep us updated, as I expect members to also do the same as well.
Questions now from the party spokespeople. Conservative spokesperson Paul Davis.
Cabinet Secretary, one of the biggest challenges facing Welsh farming is the Welsh Government's proposed designations for nitrate vulnerable zones, which if implemented could impose huge burdens on farmers and as a result force many out of business. Given that the Welsh Government's consultation ended almost a year ago, could you explain why the Welsh Government has yet to come to a decision regarding the proposed NVZ designations? Or will you now commit to bringing a statement to the Assembly Chamber before the end of the year on the Welsh Government's position and explain why this decision has taken so long?
Well, I've already given that commitment several times in this chamber, so I'm very happy to give that commitment that I will certainly bring a statement forward before the end of this term, so within the next 2 weeks. The reasons why it's taken so long is we received a large number of responses to the consultations, and we also received a large number of people's views and considerations to do things differently. I saw a presentation just last week. People are still coming forward with ideas, and as I'm very open to these ideas, I wanted to give considerable time and consideration to these views.
Well, I'm very pleased that the Cabinet Secretary will be bringing forward a statement to this chamber by the end of the term, and I look forward to that statement. Now, one of the concerns surrounding these proposals is that adhering to the slurry manure storage capacity rules could see farm businesses burdened with large capital investments in storage facilities to be compliant. Indeed, the NFU tell us that the average cost of upgrading facilities is almost £80,000. If the Welsh Government presses ahead with these designations, can you tell us what funding will be put aside to help those farmers forced to comply with any new capacity rules, given that the overall funding allocation to your budget has actually been reduced?
And I think there's a couple of points that we need to consider there. Already I've been having discussions around farmers' capacity of their slurry pits, and I think many of them are at a level that exceeds what is required at the moment. So I think I've seen that cost of 80,000. I've also seen the cost of 150,000. So again, I think we need to be realistic and pragmatic about the cost. But I do recognise that we might have to give help in certain areas around investment into the slurry pit. So again, it's something that I've been discussing with officials to see how we can help with funding where required.
You'll be aware that some Welsh farmers have already been taking steps to address the issue of nitrate pollution and improve water quality, and there's evidence of some very good work being done across Wales. For example, the Wales Catchment Sensitive Farming Demonstration Project is an example of a very successful voluntary scheme that was well received by farmers. Given that your consultation didn't consider voluntary arrangements and voluntary schemes, can you tell us why the Welsh Government didn't consider implementing a voluntary approach on this matter, and will you now consider working in partnership with farmers, with the agricultural industry, to adopt voluntary measures instead?
Well, I've constantly worked in partnership with the agricultural sector and with farmers, so again, that's been something else that we have been considering over the last year while we've looked at the vast array of responses we received. We did receive over 250 responses, but I've also had many conversations on a one-to-one basis and with groups of farmers over the past years. I've had to do the review. It is a statutory requirement under the Nitrates Directive. But we've also seen some significant agricultural pollution incidents this year. So I've had to bring everything together. It's about getting that balance. But as I said to the member at the outset, I will be making a statement within the next 2 weeks.
UKIP spokesperson Neil Hamilton.
Well, just carrying on with the NVZs, as the Cabinet Secretary knows, this is causing considerable concern amongst those who might be affected by it. And I'd just like to support the approach which has been taken by our colleague from Presiding. It is open to the Cabinet Secretary, of course, as a consequence of this consultation, to avoid a heavy-handed approach if she's convinced that we can achieve the objectives of the directives, habitats directives and environmental directives that are concerned here by voluntary means. And I'm sure she's aware of the experiment which has been undertaken in the Cleddau by farmers, which has successfully reduced nitrate levels on their farms to below those which are the limits in EU rules and regulations, and they've achieved these outcomes at a fraction of the cost which they would have incurred if they'd had to install massive new vats for the storage of slurry, etc. So can she, without wishing in any way to anticipate the results of the inquiry, reassure us today that schemes of this kind will certainly be borne in mind so that we can reduce the costs to farmers of necessary environmental controls?
Yes, I've considered many different schemes, and farmers have come to me with what they have done around this issue. And I said in my answer to Paul Davis, I've seen figures of 80,000, I've seen figures of 150,000. I spoke to a farmer, I think from Monmouthshire, who had done it absolutely at a fraction of that cost. So I do want to reassure members I am very open to the suggestions that have come forward, and that's why it has taken much longer than I did anticipate in the first place.
It wants the right decision to be made at the end of the day, and if a delay results in that, nobody's going to complain. Of course, that condition is that we get the right decision at the end of the day. But this particular experiment that I referred to a moment ago in the Cleddau has managed to reduce the nitrate leachage into the soil and the waterways by nearly 90%. So if that were to be extended county-wide into Pembrokeshire, that would be a massive advantage to us. And so schemes of this kind, I think, show the benefits of working with the industry to achieve desirable outcomes, which will please those who have environmental concerns at the top of their agenda, without having to use a stick to force people to do what they want to do. This is in the best interest of farmers as well, because the NFU have developed this blue flag scheme, just like Red Tractor, which would be a very useful method of marketing our products as well, that they're produced with environmentally sensitive policies. So that's good news for farming as well as for the environment.
I absolutely think you have to work with the industry in relation to policy and strategies, and it was just last week that the Minister for Environment and myself had a presentation around the Blue Flag scheme. So we are still considering everything that's come before us over the past year, and as I reiterate again, I will be making a statement in the next 2 weeks.
I mean, it is important, of course, that, that environmental concerns are taken seriously, and therefore that the methods employed, if they're not controlled by statute or regulation, are properly audited, and therefore that the results can be regarded as credible. And this particular scheme in the Cleddau is being audited by Natural Resources Wales. So there again, if the regulatory bodies are working hand in glove with the industry, at the end of the day, everybody is happy, and after all, happiness is what we as politicians want to produce for our constituents. So I hope that I hope that the Cabinet Secretary will be able, when she announces her result, to be the Cabinet Secretary for happiness in the countryside.
Well, yes, I'd like to think I am the Cabinet Secretary for happiness in the countryside. I think that at the beginning of that last question, you made a very important point about the balance, and I always used to say at that time I was Cabinet Secretary for Environment and Rural Affairs, so it was absolutely imperative I did that balancing. Now, obviously, we've got Minister for the Environment. That doesn't mean the environment is any less important to me as Cabinet Secretary. So it is absolutely vital that any policy you bring forward is a balanced approach, and it's certainly been very helpful having so many responses to the consultation and having so many individual farmers, and then obviously the 2 farmers who came to see me around the Blue Flag scheme, bringing forward their ideas, how they've managed to reduce the nitrates, etc. So yes, you're right, I will be bringing forward that statement.
Presiding
Cymru spokesperson Simon Thomas.
Presiding Officer, can I make the Cabinet Secretary very happy by saying I won't ask her about NVZs, but wait for her statement in a couple of weeks' time, but make her less happy perhaps by asking her this. Why has her department suffered the biggest single cut in the draft Welsh Government budget, and what does that really say about the commitment of the Government to the environment and rural affairs?
Well, you'll appreciate that we've all had to make some very difficult decisions. So I was in front of committee last week having budget scrutiny, and you'll be aware that there was a lot of noise around that my budget had been cut by 5%. It hadn't, because I transferred 35 million into the of waste funding into the RSG. But still, I have had a cut of 1.5%. I hope again I've balanced it. I've got a very broad portfolio. But I hope that no part of the portfolio feels it's had, cuts that aren't proportionate.
Nevertheless, her portfolio has suffered from the same 5% cuts on local government grants that have been recycled to help social services and health. Her she has confirmed implicitly that, in fact, her department has had the biggest cut of any department within Welsh Government in this budget. We know there are difficulties in the budget, but it's singular that this department has been singled out for that largest cut. Now, the Finance Secretary has told the Finance Committee last week that £100 million that has been held back in reserves in anticipation of further efficiency cuts can now be made available, as these cuts are not now expected following the budget last week. So can I ask her, as the Cabinet Secretary, what is she bidding for out of this £100 million? Last year, with a bit of Plaid Cymru chivvying along, she got a bit of extra money for flood prevention schemes, as I recall. What is she looking to reinstate now to her budget?
When I go up back to my office after this question session, I will be meeting with officials ahead of writing to the Finance Minister. I think I was the first to put a bid in, so you'll be pleased to hear that. You know, I have confirmed that my department's had the biggest cut, because it has. You know, it's a fact. So, you know, I'm not going to try and hide behind that. But I think we have managed to balance things. So, as I said, no one part of the portfolio has had a bigger hit than, you know, we've tried to share the pain across, if you like. You know, I didn't come into politics to do cuts. Nobody did. But we are faced with the reality. So, as you say, there's this £100 million now. What will I be looking to reinstate? Well, again, one of my priority areas, and probably shared by many members, is around warm homes. We need to be looking at what we're doing in retrofitting our housing stock, particularly to be able to meet the low carbon budgets that obviously we'll be setting. So that's one area I'm looking at. Flooding, obviously, you know, we had some horrendous flooding last week when I was up in Llangefni on Thursday. Llangefni suffered incredibly, and the member for Ynys Môn has already written to me regarding the flooding in Menai Bridge. I think it was specifically you raised, so I will be looking certainly at flooding also. But, you know, if Plaid Cymru want to come forward with any views, I'd be very happy to do that. Obviously, you supported our budget.
Quite right, we do have a budget agreement, and I'm very pleased with some of the things that we've got from that. Some of the things you mentioned, Cabinet Secretary, however, are important, and but on the whole they're capital. You could be using the ability of the new, much talked about but strange capital that's come to the Welsh Government, this transactional sort of capital, looking to see how that could go into warm homes, for example. So that still leaves you, I think, bidding for this £100 million, and I look forward to seeing the impact of your lobbying on the Finance Cabinet Secretary in the final budget. But of course, though you have been successful in paying the basic farm payments, and you announced that in the winter show this week, there are wider questions about ongoing funding as we leave the European Union. It seems increasingly clear to me that, in fact, we cannot bank the promises that have been made about ongoing CAP and farm payments beyond 2020. There's been much talk about 2022, but in fact, when you look at the guarantees, they are rock solid perhaps till 2020, but after that they look rather shaky to my mind. So can I ask her whether she agrees with that analysis from the Westminster perspective, and whether she is now in a position to give an equivocal guarantee in this Assembly that, at least for this Assembly term, this Welsh Government will continue the current envelope of farm payments?
Yes, for this Assembly term we will, so till 2021. I absolutely agree with you around the 2020 and the 2022. We have had assurance that we will have that funding until the end of the Westminster Parliament at 2022, but then you know, you hear different noises coming around. But you know, as far as I'm concerned, the Treasury has given assurance to fully fund direct payments in 2022. I'm very pleased you mentioned the basic payment scheme. I was very pleased to announce at the Winter Fair on Monday that 91% of our farmers will be getting their payment on Friday. That's the first day possible that they can do that. So we'll be paying, I think it's £201 million to over 14,000 of our farmers. And I would just like to pay tribute to my team who have done that. You know, they're not a very big team, but again, I think when I haven't seen the other countries what figures they're bringing forward, but I would imagine we'll be way ahead of the game again.
Question 3, Di.
Question 3, Di Lloyd. Thank you, Llywydd. Will the Cabinet Secretary make a statement on air pollution levels in South Wales West?
Across Wales, including in South West Wales, have improved over recent decades, but we still face significant challenges. We must do more to improve air quality in all regions, and I have tabled a debate in December to discuss plans for cross-government action.
I thank the Minister for that reply. And further to that, recent data released by the Royal College of Physicians show that 2 areas in my region, Port Talbot and Swansea, are recognised among the worst areas in the UK in terms of air quality and are breaching World Health Organisation guidelines at present. Now, with Healthy Air Cymru stating that the Welsh Government needs to lead the way on reducing air pollution in these areas, what assurances can you provide that you recognise the scale of the problem, and do you agree that you need to raise the bar in terms of your collaborative work with local authorities to tackle the air pollution issues within these areas?
May I thank the member for his question. You're absolutely right to raise this important issue, and it's something which will be high on my agenda going forward in this portfolio. We know that historically Port Talbot has a high level of PM10 pollution, and this is generally obviously attributed to the industrial nature of the area. And I know that Welsh Government officials regularly meet with steelworks operators, National Resources Wales and Neath Port Talbot County Board of Council to identify potential sources of and solutions for the high PM10 levels. As I said, we are tabling a debate next week to discuss this. We'll look at actually not just what local authorities are doing in terms of the clean air framework, but also what we can do across government in terms to meet those challenges and to create healthy, better air quality throughout Wales.
David Rees.
And I thank the Minister for her answers, particularly to Port Talbot, to identify the actions you're taking. But however, it's not just PM10s, it's PM2.5s as well. And knowing the area, it's not just the industry and the steelworks, it's also the motorway, which is caught in that narrow strip, and the roads in the south of it. So one of the ways you can actually look at it is actually look at how planning, and maybe you can talk to your Cabinet Secretary colleague, about planning regulations, just look at the cumulative impact upon any decisions taken upon air pollution, not just the individual project. Because the more we see coming in, which creates more pollution, it adds to what's already there. And what's already there is not getting lower. So please look at the issues. We can ensure that we do start seeing a decrease, not an increase.
Thank you, Dairis, for your question. Yeah, you're absolutely right that we need to look at cross-government, cross-departmental working on this. And I'm sure I will I will speak to my Cabinet Secretary colleague on how we can actually go forward this, also not just cross-government in terms of planning, but transport, health and local government.
Susie Davis.
Diolch, Llywydd, and can I congratulate you to your new job as well? Can I begin by saying that scrutiny has been brought to bear, and actually the dreaded Nowcaster system in Swansea Council, with which I appreciate you may not personally be familiar, is now up and running after several years of delay, and advising drivers in real time whether the air quality in that particular part of Swansea is safe enough to drive through. It doesn't tell them when the air quality is good enough, but it does tell them when it's bad. Your department has actually refused a further application for funding for this particular project, and I appreciate you may not know much about it yourself. But do you think your department would be more likely to support an application to expand upon the Nowcaster system if the data collected by the machines could more widely inform traffic management in the city, for example, providing evidence for a Swansea Bay Regional Metro, perhaps, or whether it could help with the clean air framework in helping create enforceable targets for particulate reduction? Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. Thank you for your question, and thank you for your warm words of congratulations. I have a brief familiarity with the Nowcaster system. You raised some very valid points there, and I think if you want to follow it up now with a letter to myself, and I think going forward, as I said, I'm really keen to get this high on the agenda, making sure we work cross-government and with local authorities and across the board to how we tackle this important issue, not just in South West Wales, but across Wales.
Caroline Jones.
Diolch, Llywydd. I too wish to offer my congratulations to you. Minister, people living within my region have to contend with some of the worst air pollution in the UK. For a few days this month, children attending school in Margam had to contend PM10s at twice the safe daily limit. According to Public Health Wales, this is one of the biggest public health challenges facing our nation, killing 2,000 people per year. Of course, the biggest contributor to poor air quality is transport, which is made much worse by the level of congestion we are seeing now on our roads. Minister, how will your government ensure that new developments do not contribute to this congestion, and how can the planning system be utilised to limit congested road infrastructure? Thank you.
Thank you again for your congratulations. Just to point out, I am the Minister, not the Cabinet Secretary. I don't want to upset my colleague at this early stage.
I was anticipating less, to be honest with you.
Absolutely, it's particularly children and individuals are particularly susceptible to the effects of air pollution, and so we need to take local authorities do need to take a risk-based approach in looking at how we monitor this situation. But absolutely, I think we need to, going forward, as I said previously, it is really a really important issue, and obviously with respect to planning, it is in the Cabinet Secretary's remit, so I'm sure we will be working together closely on this going forward.
Cwestiwn 4, Mike.
Question 4, Mike Hedges.
What action is being taken by the Welsh Government to protect peatlands?
The Welsh Government is committed to bringing all peatlands supporting semi-natural habitats into sustainable management by 2020 and has established an integrated programme of delivery to ensure this target is met. The current programme is improving the condition of our peatlands and we have secured funding for further action.
Well, can I just remind you, and perhaps everybody else, I did congratulate you when you came to committee, so I'll add further congratulations in here, but it has already been done. What I was going to ask is what progress has been made towards the target of getting all peatlands in Wales into restoration management by 2020, and do you expect it to be done on a linear basis, or do you expect it exponentially or inverse exponentially?
Thank you, and thank you again for joining in with the congratulations. We have strong evidence from our monitoring programme that our integrated approach is having a positive impact, improving the condition and resilience of our peatlands. Our land management scheme, Glassdoor, is making a significant contribution to this programme, with over 65% of our target area already under Glassdoor management. And I think our EU funds are playing an important role in supporting us to improve the condition of approximately 690 hectares of our most important peatland sites.
David Melding.
Minister, having previously just now congratulated you, I think I should now switch into attack mode, otherwise you'll be given sort of false reassurance about how you'll be treated in this chamber. But I think this is a really important question. Peatlands are the most important terrestrial carbon store in the UK, 20 times more carbon stored there than the UK forests. You said you've secured funding, but a lot of the funding at the moment for the management scheme is through the EU Life funding. And I just wonder what's going to happen to that. I mean, are there any plans for 2020-21? Because obviously restoring these peatlands and then maintaining them, the maintaining bit is going to require ongoing funding.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. I'm under no illusions that I should just make the most of the warm words of congratulations till we move on to real business in the chamber. Yeah, it really is a very important area and really important that we're able to sustain that going forward. And I'm sure the member appreciate that as being new to the portfolio, I'm still in discussions with how we take that forward after 2020. So I'm happy if you to follow that up in writing to you.
Question 5, Neil Hamilton.
Will the Cabinet Secretary provide an update on the Welsh Government's bovine TB eradication programme in Mid and West Wales?
Thank you. Mid and West Wales predominantly encompasses high and intermediate TB areas. Here we are focusing on developing bespoke action plans for persistent TB breakdowns, which contain measures aimed at clearing up infection. Action plans are agreed in consultation with the farmer, their private vet and the Animal and Plant Health Agency.
Well, I thank Cabinet Secretary for that reply. Will she agree with me that although there's no easy answer or simple solution to the eradication of TB in cattle, one promising way forward is a greater concentration upon genetics? And the AHDB has put together a genetic index, which is funded by UK farmers, of course, to undertake research and development on their behalf. And this will enable us to target strains of cattle which have a greater propensity to resist TB, and therefore this must, for the future, be an important element in the government's overall strategy to eradicate this terrible disease.
You raise a very important point, and I think you're right, there is no simple solution. Just this morning I've had a meeting with officials, and that included people who are doing research into this area, because you'll be aware, as part of the refresh of the eradication programme, one of the things I promised to bring forward was a target for when I would like to be officially TB-free here in Wales. And that is an element of the discussions that we've been having. So I think it is about bringing many sort of enhanced measures together, but certainly R&D, and going forward, we need to be looking at absolutely everything and learning from other areas and other countries also.
Russell George.
George Flowery. I certainly welcome the new scheme to tackle bovine TB. I think we all want to see this cruel disease eradicated in both the wildlife population and in cattle. My concern is that no additional pressure is put on farmers who have for too long suffered the effects of bovine TB. Now, you've already answered questions and talked about the significant cut to your budget. Can I ask in relation to that, in relation to the draft budget where there is a significant cut to your department, how do you feel that that is going to affect how you are able to tackle bovine TB?
There won't be any cut to the funding in relation to eradicating TB. You'll be aware that in the refreshed programme, there were part of the programme was one of the things was reducing compensation by 50%. For example, but that's more, we're looking at 10%, I think it is, of the budget to eradicate TB comes from the EU, so I could be losing that in the future. So we need to look at how we can make sure we do have enough funding. But it was one of the questions I was asked last week by the committee in budget scrutiny, but I will just have to find that from the Animal Health and Welfare Bell. So I don't think there will be any impact on that at all this year.
Simon Thomas.
Diolch, Llywydd.
Thank you, Llywydd. One of the saddest things that one can do as a member representing this region is receiving correspondence from farmers who are suffering as a result of TB on their farms and seeing what happens to their livestock. I received one such message over the past fortnight talking about the herd being affected and 6 cows being destroyed on farm, and they were about to calve too, and that was heartbreaking for the farmer responsible for those cattle. But one of the things that was also very saddening for her was the fact that the tests that led to the destroying of those cattle were inconclusive tests. Now, I know that we do have to take steps, but I also know that there are more accurate tests available which are used, for example, in North America. So what work are you doing to look into whether now, under the new scheme that you have, whether we are now ready as a nation to move towards different tests for TB which are more accurate as we deal with the disease?
You know, I do not underestimate the distress having a TB breakdown causes to farmers and their families. And I too received, I would imagine, the same correspondence that the member had done. And I met with the Chief Veterinary Officer just this morning to discuss it, because it was indeed very, very distressing correspondence. And I will be writing direct to the farmer myself. Again, going forward, we need to look at the very best testing that's possible. And if there are examples in other countries, I would want to obviously consider if they could be brought forward to Wales as part of those enhanced measures I referred to in relation to the refresh of the programme.
Nid yw Steffan Lewis yn yr...
Steffan Lewis is not in the chamber to ask question 6. Question 7, Mark Isherwood.
What guidance does the Welsh Government issue regarding planning applications for housing developments?
Thank you. The Welsh Government's planning policy for housing is set out in Planning Policy Wales. Further guidance is provided in technical advice notes. TAM 1, Joint Housing Land Availability Studies, provides advice on calculating housing land supply. TAM 2, Planning and Affordable Housing, provides advice on the delivery of affordable housing.
Thank you. Well, commenting in June in our mutual local paper after the First Minister had approved a planning application in Cley on the basis of recommendation of independent inspector, you said that controversial issues such as this will continue until a council adopts a local development plan. I recently, at the request of residents, attended the public inquiry in Pennyfold, Flintshire. I know you can't comment on that, but the concern was expressed to me that because their LDP had not been concluded, quote, developers were taking advantage of the situation by citing 5-year supply and loopholes in TAN 1 to get the planning through. In October, the leader of
Conwy Council wrote to you saying calculation methodology of 5-year land supply within TAN 1, revised by the Welsh Government in January 2015, is undermining local development plans across Wales. And in your response, which was actually quite helpful, you said the lack of a 5-year housing land supply may be one of the considerations determining a planning application. However, applications which do not meet the relevant policy requirements may be refused by the authority and planning inspector. Could you expand on that? How should a local authority, an applicant, and particularly a planning inspector interpret that statement in this context?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. If I could just take the opportunity, the first example Mark Ishwood gave was in my constituency, but obviously the decision was taken by the First Minister, not by myself. In relation to the general point you raise about TAM 1, it is a very difficult situation if the 5-year land supply isn't demonstrated, and certainly it's happening not just in North East Wales and North Wales, as you referred to, it's happening in other local authorities too. And unfortunately, if a local planning authority hasn't got a 5-year housing land supply, they are open to speculative planning applications for housing development. However, all such applications should be assessed against all relevant policy considerations, including the need to increase housing land supply and the principle of sustainable development, and that was the point I was trying to make.
Mick Antonin.
Secretary, there have been quite a number of significant housing developments or proposed developments in the Taff Ely and Pontypridd area. One of the issues, of course, arises during that process is the capacity in respect of local public services, in particular, have in mind general practitioner services. Will they be able to cope with the actual additional housing in that particular capacity? Now, it seems to me that one of the concerns we've had, and I've had it expressed by a number of GP practices now, is that they are not statutory consultees in those planning processes. And it seems to me, with the scale of housing developments we have, it's very important that we actually have a review as to who actually are statutory consultees, and that serious consideration should now be given to including bodies like local general practitioner practices to participate within that. It's a directly relevant part of the process, very necessary information to have, but which isn't included as a matter of course at the moment.
Thank you. Yes, I agree the capacity of primary care facilities is an important material consideration when considering the planning merits of proposed development. Obviously, the LHB is responsible for providing primary care services for its local population, so I would expect them to engage in the preparation of any development plans. They know what capacity they've got. It's important that a GP surgery feeds that information through to the local health board. We are having discussions at the current time as to whether health boards should be statutory consultees for major planning applications.
Question 8.
Question 8, Mark Reckless.
What assessment has the Cabinet Secretary made of the difference between world food prices and EU food prices?
Thank you. Food price differences between countries or blocs like the EU and global prices are driven by currency values, supply and demand, trade rules and internal market regulations. The EU Commission monitors European food prices, and the UN Food and Agriculture Organization runs an international food price index of major commodities.
And that monitoring shows that food prices in the EU are substantially higher than outside the EU. Once we leave the EU, does the Cabinet Secretary agree that it will be for the UK government to determine the extent to which we apply WTO tariffs against imports from outside the EU? And it's up to that government whether to apply those at all or whether to negotiate free trade deals with particular countries. Does she also accept that in the unlikely event of there being WTO tariffs between the UK and the EU, while that would be very difficult for some sectors of the agricultural economy, notably lamb, other sectors, notably beef and dairy, would potentially have significant opportunities as imports from countries such as the Republic of Ireland were restricted?
I think Brexit, it's a massive issue. It's really threatening our industry, and I think it's causing a great deal of uncertainty. It is obviously for the UK government to have those trade discussions and bring forward a trade deal. However, we've made it very clear to the UK government the shape that we think these negotiations and these discussions need to take. I think everybody accepts, and I'm sure even on this side of the House, the political situation we've got at the moment is creating a lot of tension. We are having those ongoing discussions. Obviously, the First Minister, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and myself primarily are having discussions around trade and what tariffs will be imposed. You're quite right. I am really fearful for the lamb sector, and some of our scenario planning is of great concern. We also know that the British Retail Consortium have suggested that without a new trade agreement, if the UK and EU impose WTO tariffs, the average cost of food imported by retailers could increase by 22%.
Jenny Rathbone.
Unlike Mark Reckless, I'm not looking forward to the world of chlorinated chicken and hormone-fed beef. So I hope that we continue to have the high quality of food standards that we currently enjoy. The message is coming from the British Ports Authority, if we were to leave the customs union, is not very optimistic, in the sense that whilst we currently have a free passport of goods to and from Britain, were we to crash out of the European Union, this could actually bring all transactions to a horrible halt. And where we're talking about fresh produce, why would anybody bother to import fresh produce if they don't think they're going to be able to get it to market in time? I just wondered what assessment the government has made of the impact of leaving the customs union and the impact it would have on the food that we currently import, particularly fresh produce from the European Union.
Question. This forms part of our scenario planning, which I mentioned in my answer to Mark Reckless. Parts of this are indeed very, very scary. We are making our views very well known to the Welsh Government, to the UK Government at every level, that we should remain in the customs union. We need that free market that we've got right on our doorstep, and I would always hope that we will have a relationship with the EU. But discussions I had certainly at the Winter Fair on Monday, people are very fearful at the uncertainty that the current discussions, the way the current discussions seem to be going. But we are, as a Welsh Government, we are particularly concerned that Brexit will drive food prices much higher unless we have a really excellent trade deal.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The next item is questions to the Cabinet Secretary for Local Government and Public Services, and the first question is from Leanne Wood.
Will the Cabinet Secretary provide an update on the work of the Task Force for the Valleys in the Rhondda?
The Task Force published a detailed delivery plan on the 7th of November. It identified how we will take forward actions in 3 priority areas: delivering good quality jobs and the skills to do them, supporting better public services and strengthening communities. Many and most actions in the plan will positively impact the people living in the Rhondda Valleys.
I thank you for your letter, Cabinet Secretary, which I received this morning, outlining how the recently published Valleys Task Force delivery plan will benefit people in the Rhondda constituency. In your letter, you talk about a number of things that you've just outlined there: improving childcare through a pilot scheme in Ferndale, supporting local builders, and I quote, improving public service provision through community hubs, whatever that means. All of this is impact at all on the 33.1% of Rhondda working age population who are economically inactive. And that's a figure that's much higher than the Welsh average of 24.8% and the UK figure, which is 22%. Now, the reasons for this economic result are chronic. That is why the Rhondda needs specific action from your government. The results of this plan will be determined by the number of people who end up in good jobs. Can you tell us by how much do you hope to reduce economic activity in the Rhondda after you've implemented the Valleys Task Force plan? Can you give us a figure, please?
I'm sure the member for the Rhondda will join me in being very grateful for the way that many people from the Rhondda Valleys have contributed to shaping our vision for the future. I'm sure that she has read the plan that we've outlined, that we published on the 7th of November, and I'd be surprised if she could describe that plan as being vague. There are many tens of actions there with timescales and targets which outline exactly how we'll be answering the questions that she raises. But she does raise an important point, of course, because economic inactivity is a fundamental issue facing all communities in the valleys, including the Rhondda constituency she represents. And we have put in our plan a target for creating 7,000 additional jobs over the coming 4 years in order to ensure that the communities of the valleys have the same opportunities to access high-quality work as communities elsewhere in Wales. That target is in the plan. The target is in the plan. The timescales are in the plan. I would advise the member for the Rhondda to read it.
Andrew R.T. Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, in your original speech on your task force activities, you identified the natural environment in the valleys, and in particular the Rhondda Valley is a good example of that, where large areas of common land exist at the very top of the valleys, and a hugely underutilised asset that exists across South Wales. I'd be grateful to understand exactly now some time has lapsed since your original identification of that environmental asset, how the government is going to make better use of it to encourage greater economic activity within the valleys, but above all, a better lifestyle for people living in the valleys by using that wonderful natural resource of the commons that exist across South Wales.
I would agree very much with the point that the member for South Wales makes. I think not only the common land, but the land across the environment of the valleys of South Wales is a huge asset, not only for those of us who are born, brought up, live and represent the valleys, but for the whole country. And through creating what we've called at the moment a landscape park in the valleys, I hope that we will be able to maximise the potential of not only common land, but the environment as a whole to ensure access for people in the valleys to access the local environment, but also to protect and enhance that environment, to work with landowners and farmers and others in the area to ensure that we're able to appreciate and value the environment that we have in the valleys, but also to ensure that we are able to deliver value for the communities that live alongside and within it. I hope that the Landscape Park is and will be a catalyst for action to enable all the ambitions that the member have outlined and which I share will be able to be met.
Question 2,
Question 2, Neil McAvoy.
Will the Cabinet Secretary provide an update on electoral reform in local government in Wales?
I'm currently considering the responses to the consultation on electoral reform. I intend to make a statement on the next steps in February.
Thanks. Cabinet Secretary, I recently responded to the consultation, and question 33 stated, do you agree that it should not be permissible to serve both as an Assembly member and councillor? Aside from that being very leading and, I'd say, unbefitting of a serious consultation, it's the government's position, I understand, to ban AMs from also being councillors. I'll just point out that you are carrying out two roles. A ministerial role, which says that ministers must keep separate their roles as minister and Assembly member. Effectively, there are two different jobs. There are members of the House of Lords, both a Lord and a Baroness, who are serving in your government. We have a member of the European Parliament who's unable to be here today. And we are successfully being presided over by an Assembly member, who is also the presiding officer.
Carry on, I'm intrigued as to where you're going.
In terms of roles, we also have company directors and people otherwise employed. So really, to get to the nub of the question, what is it? Thank you. What is it that offends the government so much about an AM being a councillor? And really, are you planning to stop AMs from acting as councillors simply to frustrate democracy and do through government and legislation what you cannot do through the ballot box?
Presiding Officer, Councillor McAvoy will hear my conclusions at the same time as anyone else. I will say this to him, that I believe it is important for people who are here serve democracy by not having any conflict of interest. It is my view that serving as a local authority member and a member of this place creates a conflict of interest.
Mike Hedges.
Can I remind members how overwhelmingly the AV form of PR was rejected in the referendum? Our STV is based on a guess how many seats you can win. Will the Welsh Government legislate for that a supermajority voting by councillors and councils of 2/3 will be necessary if councils want to change their voting system?
Presiding Officer, I've already disappointed my good friend from Swansea East with my views on proportional representation. I don't propose to disappoint him again this afternoon. But I will say to him that when we look at how we reform and deepen our democracy, I believe that we have to be bold and radical and not conservative and look and embrace change.
Nick Ramsey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I welcome the Cabinet Secretary to his new role. I once named you the Minister Emeritus, you may remember, and it seems that you're clearly fitting with that name. Look forward to... I never called him a boomerang. You said that. Cabinet Secretary, the history of local government in Wales is one of reorganisation after reorganisation, reform after reform over very many years. I was very pleased when your predecessor kicked into the long grass the idea of local government reorganisation in Wales. Are you planning on revisiting that that issue over the next few years? And would you agree with me that whatever you do decide or not decide to do with local government organisation and the electoral system that may entail, that what local government in Wales needs is stability, so that elected officers and councillors in those authorities can get on with the job of delivering local services for local people, which they're elected to do?
Yes, I do agree with that. I believe that we do require stability, but stability which is born of a robust ability to deliver high-quality services. We heard from a WLGA last week that they do not believe that the current delivery of services is sustainable, and I think that we need to listen to those words. And certainly that is a consideration that I will be taking as I move forward with policy in this area.
Plenary.
An opportunity now for the party spokespeople to ask questions. Plaid Cymru spokesperson Adam Price.
I'd like to return, if I may, to the Valleys Task Force Action Plan, implementation plan. I think all of us would agree that it contains, at a high level, very, very laudable aims in terms of our communities, and we thank members of the task force and indeed all those who took part in the various consultations that occurred across the Valleys areas. But as the Cabinet Secretary, I'm sure will concede, the key will be in the detail, of course, of how the plan is delivered. Now, there are 68 action points in the plan as a whole, but you referred to specific targets. Well, you know, maybe I can help him out here, because actually the plan itself on page 46 actually shows that there are only 2 specific targets. I mean, after going through all the well-being indicators, there are only 2. I mean, and 7,000 additional jobs, and 2,000 of which will be created as a result of entrepreneurship activity. Could you just say, just for clarity, are those net additional jobs, in the jargon, are those jobs created rather than jobs created, safeguarded and assisted? And seeing as this is the only target in the plan, what budget has been set aside to create those jobs? I mean, even if we take the standard, 30,000 or 40,000 per job, which the Welsh Government uses, you're talking of hundreds of millions of additional funds. If actually we only achieve the level of job creation that we've seen in the enterprise zones, 90 million odd in Ebbw Vale, only 170 jobs created in that case, then you're talking of billions, and yet there's no additional money set aside that I can see in the Welsh Government's draft budget.
I'm grateful for the question. The £90 million in Evervale, of course, also includes part of the dualling of the 465 road, which was postponed by Plaid Cymru. In terms of the direct question you asked, whether it's net jobs, the answer is yes, it is net jobs. And in terms of the funding for that, funding will be found from within the budgets of the Cabinet Secretaries, which will be contributing towards that. What the Task Force of the Valley seeks to do is to shape and to drive government policy to enable us to achieve our ambitions in the valleys. Now, I know that you share those ambitions. I'm grateful to you for the points that you've made in the past on that. We're currently leading a programme of seminars in each one of the 7 strategic hubs to look at exactly how each hub will contribute both to the jobs target you've outlined, but also to our other targets which are outlined in the overall vision. When we've completed that task, I hope by the end of February, I'll be able to make a further statement on that.
Cabinet Secretary, I suppose you and I kind of represent the arc of the valleys, the former coalfield area. You representing the eastern valleys, I representing the west. I was wondering if the geography really of this strategy at the moment is out of kilter. I mean, as we've heard from the leader of my party, really, I mean, there are areas in the Rhondda, Cynnon, etc., which are not represented at all in the 7 strategic hubs, which, to my mind, at the moment seem to have been chosen, not quite at random, certainly in an ad hoc way, both in their location, but also possibly in their sectoral focus. We did have the announcement yesterday about 2 entrepreneurial tech hubs, which will be in the southwestern valleys and in the eastern valleys. And there's also the community hubs, an unspecified number of community hubs that we'll have there as well. But even if you look at the map, Cabinet Secretary, Ammanford is actually outside the map, and many of the other western valleys are actually not included within the definition of the valleys area. So surely shouldn't we have actually, in order to underpin the strategy, a strategic development plan, looking at the geography of the valleys, making sure, for example, these hubs are calibrated in terms of the new metro stations with the areas of investment. And, you know, who's going to deliver all this? I mean, with all these hubs, surely we need a hub of hubs, Cabinet Secretary, an agency, a team of people that are going to deliver this, these 68 action points. You know, what's the provision currently, and what's the connection with the city deal? Because it seems to me that the Valleys Task Force and the implementation plan are over here, the city deals are over there, and there doesn't seem to be much interconnection between the two at the moment.
Over the years, the member for East Carmarthenshire has called for more strategic thinking in the valleys and elsewhere in Wales, and has called for less of a pork barrel approach to politics. I think you've made a number of different interventions along those lines, and I've always agreed with you on those matters. But, you know, in the last few months, since these strategic hubs have been announced, I've received one letter from the member for the Rhondda asking for a strategic hub in the Rhondda, and another from yourself asking for one in Ammanford. And I'm not sure that always outlines the strategic thinking that you've had in mind. Whilst the members call for strategic thinking, and what I will say to him is that each one of these 7 hubs, I would be happy to consider developing the model, I have to say, but each of the 7 strategic hubs is linked to the metro, is linked to public transport, is led both by local authorities, informed by the work being done on the city deals, and also by the Welsh Government, and that is why we're going through a process of seminars at the moment to ensure that we do understand what exactly we're trying to achieve with each one of these hubs. But I will say to the member that it is important that we do look across the whole of the valleys region. The points he makes about the Western Valleys are well made and recognised. I accept those points. And I think we do need to look at how we constantly ensure that we're able to reach people across the whole of the valleys regions. And I think that is a challenge which we accept, and a challenge I hope we will meet.
I was wondering if we could step back a little bit as well, if we can ask ourselves a deeper question, which I'm not sure is sufficiently addressed yet in the plan that has been published, which is why the initiatives of the past have failed. because the most sobering reading of all, I mean, I urge falling into bad habits, I urge members to read the engagement study, which is actually based on surveys with people in the valleys and of how they see things. And it's sobering reading indeed. 45% saying that the state of their town centres were poor, 54% saying that support for businesses were poor, 30% saying that the local health services were poor, 45% poor transport services. And we have to ask ourselves, why are we in this position? And unless we have a sufficient analysis and an honest analysis, and I realise that for a government that has been in power for the best part of 2 decades, that is a difficult question to ask. But unless we ask it, then we are condemned, are we not, to repeat the failures of the past?
In many ways, the plan which I published on the 7th of November is a plan from the valleys and not simply a plan for the valleys. It's about listening to people, talking with people, having conversations with people about what they want to see in their communities for the future. Many of them do describe their communities in the way that you've illustrated this afternoon. I accept that fully. But what I will say to you is not the role of government simply to describe the problems. It's the role of government to act as a catalyst to create solutions. And that is what this government is seeking to do.
Conservative spokesperson David Melding.
It's now been 2 years since the Innovative Homelessness Measure and the Housing Act Wales 2014 were introduced, and I think it's won many plaudits for its preventative approach. I think it's been tougher to deal with rough sleepers already on the streets or on the verge of going on the streets. And I wonder if I can ask the Minister what the Welsh Government is doing to reduce the number of rough sleepers in Wales.
I thank you for that question, and as you'd imagine, tackling the issue of rough sleeping is a priority for Welsh Government and a personal priority for me, especially at this particular time of year. As we're noticing the weather getting colder, and we are actually seeing increased numbers of people sleeping on our streets. So in 2016, Welsh Government improved the national rough sleeper count so that we're able to capture that truer picture of the number of people who are sleeping rough on the streets of our towns and cities and other communities across Wales. And I think that that's important, that we do get a better picture of the number of people involved and the issues facing those people involved so that we can better target those services. Also back in 2016 we introduced StreetLink Cymru, and that's a service which enables members of the public to alert authorities when they see an individual who is rough sleeping, and then some outreach work can be done to reach out to that individual to explore what can be done to find them temporary and hopefully eventually more permanent accommodation as well. In terms of the budget, we're seeking to increase the amount of money that we put into tackling homelessness more generally, with an additional £4 million for the homelessness prevention grant this particular year in order to prevent people from finding themselves in that particular situation. But it is, as you I know appreciate, a very complex picture. People who are rough sleep do have a wide variety of complex issues and life experiences that they're dealing with. So the response really has to be a partnership approach. Welsh Government working with local authorities, providing the resources that they need, but also making sure that we have that network of support locally with all of the organisations who do a fantastic job in terms of outreach and support for rough sleepers.
Can I say, Llywydd, I agree with the Minister. This is an important matter at this time of year because we naturally, as Christmas approaches, think in particular of people who are having to sleep on the streets. But it really is a long-standing... Right about data collection, it has improved, and this probably accounts for some of the perceived increase. But, you know, the Wallich recently carried out a survey and recorded a 21% increase in rough sleepers in Swansea, 67% increase in Bridgend, and a 93% increase in Newport. There are, some signs of real initiative and hope as well. You may have seen in today's Western Mail the homelessness charity Llamau have announced a new project, and they've had a lot of support from the business community in setting up or seeking to set up a helpline for particularly young people who are on the verge of, or may have just gone to live on the streets. Because of the multifaceted nature of this challenge, I wonder if the Welsh Government needs to do something really quite decisive. For instance, by declaring that it believes a housing-first approach is the main way to combat rough sleeping.
I thank you for that question, and certainly we are expanding our approach to Housing First and commissioning new Housing First projects to help people into their own tenancies and increasing access to emergency accommodation. The previous Minister did provide some additional funding to improve and increase the capacity of emergency accommodation, particularly in the Cardiff area. But I agree that Housing First is the way forward in terms of ensuring that people with individual groups who are perhaps more vulnerable, so young people particularly. I think you were at the launch of the Llamau project, which did involve businesses in terms of tackling young rough sleeping particularly, and that was also attended by the First Minister, because he's made it clear that youth homelessness is a particular personal priority for him as well, find themselves on the streets. And we're developing a new housing pathway specifically for veterans to try and ensure that they are able to transition well into civilian life, and also ways in which we can engage with them if and when they are rough sleepers in a way that's appropriate to them and that has a resonance for them.
You know, there's much of which I agree with in that response, and on piecemeal we see many good initiatives, and it's trying to combine them. And I just wonder if we need to look at traditional models which have not answered the problem to the extent that we would demand, and they're basically treatment-first models, usually based in hostile environment rather than in a home that is then supported, and you're ensured that the person feels secure in their tenancy and in a home-based approach. But, you know, as I said, the traditional models have been treatment first, and that's what you do before you put someone in a home of their own. And turning this around to the Housing First model is a challenge, but already we're seeing remarkable success, for instance, in the project in Anglesey, which has been piloted by the Woolwich Foundation. And we've seen, you know, some countries now adopt Housing First, like Finland, where it's been remarkably successful. So is the Welsh Government up to, you know, a fundamental review of the old systems, treatment first generally, and looking at Housing First?
I'm absolutely open to looking at what more we can do to expand Housing First. As you do, I completely see the sense and the benefit in terms of ensuring that people have that warm, safe home, and that's the building block then around which they can start to build a life and tackle issues such as substance misuse and so on, because we know that many people with substance misuse problems do have problems also maintaining a secure tenancy, and that just compounds the kind of stresses and pressures on those individuals. I'd be more than happy to enter in some more detailed conversations. Very keen to look at the example in Finland and any other examples that there are of Housing First and when it works well. But to me, it makes perfect sense.
UKIP
spokesperson Gareth Bennett.
I'd like to welcome the Cabinet Secretary to his new role. So, welcome. Sorry. It's a bit of a reconfigured department that you'll be running, in that you have the local government responsibilities that Mark Drakeford used to hold, and also the communities portfolio, which has come from a different department. So it may take us all a little while to get used to what is essentially a new portfolio. So my first question is, how do you think this new department will better deliver on local government and public service issues in Wales?
Can I say how grateful I am to the member for his very kind remarks, an example to all members, I would say. brings together a number of functions, as has been outlined by the member. I hope that by bringing together a responsibility for both local government and the delivery of public services across the country, we will be able to pursue a programme to sustain and support excellence in all of our public services, protecting and defending the people who deliver them, and ensuring that the people that all of us serve at all sides of the chamber have the best possible public services that we can deliver.
You also bring with you, from your previous role, the job of delivering the programme of the Valleys Task Force, which we've been hearing about at some length today. And I think it's interesting that we have been talking about this a lot, because it's possibly a subject that over the last 18 months we probably haven't heard enough about the mechanics of how it will work. So I think we do need to look at it. One aspect that I'm interested in is retraining, the retraining issue. We live these days in a fairly fluid labour market. If people leave their job for whatever reason, they may quickly need to retrain for another sector of work. So skills is a key issue, as you've acknowledged in the past. How will the Valleys Task Force improve retraining? And
the former member of Minister for Skills, he's now Leader of the House, was and remains a member of the task force. And
yes, thanks for that response, and I hope there will be very important. Now, an awful lot of young people these days go to university or college, as I'm sure you're aware. But this may not be the best route for everyone, and indeed a significant number of young people may not want to go to college and might prefer exclusively on-the-job training. Does this approach form part of your thinking in relation to the Valleys Task Force and the other relevant parts of your portfolio?
Yes, one of the most important pieces of work has been driven by the former Minister for Skills and our Leader of the House, who's in her place today, has been to drive forward an employability programme, an all-age apprenticeship programme, which will deliver skills for the 21st century, skills that will be required in the future and may not be available in the workforce of today. That will continue to be as important in the valleys as it is elsewhere. How we deliver that programme in the valleys, of course, may well be different depending on local circumstances. In answer to the questions from the Plaid Cymru spokesperson this afternoon, I tried to outline that we do have a number of different targets which will drive forward the creation of 7,000 new jobs in the valleys. They will be jobs which will require skill levels which perhaps we don't have in the population at the moment, and we will be ensuring that we're able to deliver exactly those skills for the future.
Question 3, Adam Price.
Question 3, Adam Price. Will the Cabinet Secretary provide an update on the Welsh Government's plans for a National Academy of Government? I am considering the options for taking this forward as part of the 2-year budget agreement with Plaid Cymru. Academy Wales provides support, governance, improvement and academic institutions.
As the Cabinet Secretary is aware, I believe Professor Jerry Holtham has been promoting the idea for some years, that there's an opportunity here for Wales to develop a centre which would be internationally renowned, to create an école nationale, in the words of Professor Holtham, for leaders and managers within the public sector. There are many things that you can say about Professor Holtham, but lack of ambition is not one of them. But why not? Why can't we not only meet our own needs by creating a new generation of managers and leaders in the public sector, but also create a centre which will be world-renowned?
I'm very pleased to say that Academy has been developing a whole host of relationships with institutions and academics in various institutions across Wales and beyond our borders. I am aware of the views of Jerry Holtham, and I don't disagree with him. I know that this is something that you yourself have emphasised for some years, and I am more than happy to continue that discussion with you to look at Wales to see whether that
want high quality grads is something
which I think is completely unnecessary. We've got some excellent leadership schools already in our high-quality universities here in Wales, and I think we ought to take advantage of the opportunities that they present. Can I ask what sort of budget you have allocated from within your portfolio for this particular project, and question you on whether that might be better spent, frankly, in investing in other ways?
I hope that all of us, I hope that all of us will be generous enough to see and appreciate what others are seeking to achieve. And I think seeking tabloid headlines probably undermines that ambition. And I hope that Darren Millar will reflect on his contribution to this question and will reflect also on the ambition that we all share to have the best possible leadership across all of our public services, and that is something which I believe everybody should and want to invest in.
Question 4, Dai Lloyd.
Question 4, Dai Lloyd.
Thank you very much, Llywydd. Will the Cabinet Secretary make a statement on the delivery of our valleys, our future within South Wales West?
The Valleys Delivery Plan covers the valleys in the South Wales West constituency, such as the Dillais and Llanvi valleys. It sets out how the Task Force's priorities will be delivered, who will be involved, the expected benefits, and the timescales for completion.
We all want to see regeneration of the valleys succeed, but residential development proposals for Northern Bridgend, for example, are hardly groundbreaking visions of the future. And then there are areas such as the Swansea Valley, which are not likely to benefit very much at all as the plan stands at the moment. In essence, many, as we've heard, believe that the delivery plan needs more work and scrutiny. So when will the Assembly as a whole have an opportunity to scrutinise the delivery plan in detail?
I'm rather surprised at the question from the member for South Wales West. He's been a long-standing member of this place, and he knows that scrutiny is what is actually taking place at the moment. I'm surprised he doesn't recognise that. He can scrutinise me at questions and in committee at the time of their choosing. I attend all committees whenever I'm invited to do so. I will say to him that perhaps he needs to look harder at the region he represents. I was in Banwen a couple of weeks ago speaking to members of the community there, and they were fully engaged in designing the sort of improvements they want to see in their community. I would suggest that the members spend some time with them.
David Rees.
Cabinet Secretary, can I congratulate you on your promotion from the middle benches to the front benches once again? But also, you talked about the Valley Task Force, and you've highlighted two hubs. And actually, you've put the Neath hub in, and you've put the Llanvi Valley one in now. Of course, the Avon Valley is in between those two. And the Rhondda, thank you. And there are many of us who want to fight. There are many of us who actually want it in our own valleys.
Answer how.
But the question comes is, how do you ensure you engage with those valleys, and not in those particular areas, to ensure that those deprived communities, and they are deprived communities, are able to get benefits from these hubs, and that we can see progress going across all the valleys and not just the ones which the hubs are located? And you're welcome to come to Cummer any time and Croesau to see it yourself.
The meeting that was held in that area, I think, was a lively meeting where you had a lot of those views expressed. And we are seeking to continue to ensure that we do hold public events across the whole of the Valleys region to ensure that we are able to listen to and to move forward on the basis of what we hear. One of the issues that we found through the last year or so of public engagement, as the member well knows, is that this is a plan from the valleys and not just for the valleys. It's something that was being designed for people in the valleys, across the whole of the valleys. But at the same possible to have a strategic hub in across the whole of the valleys region. That is the last thing we need at the moment. We need bold, strategic visions, we need delivery, we need investment, we need to bring people together. This government needs to act as a leader and a catalyst, and this government will certainly do that.
Susie Davis.
Diolch, Llywydd. Can I offer my congratulations as well, Cabinet Secretary? I was slightly more excited to see that the Llanvi Valley was included in your plans, but I do presume that you've already spoken to Bridgend County Borough Council about what your expectations of them are going to be, not just in terms of what they're going to do, but what the outcomes are going to be in this. I heard what you said to Dai Lloyd about there being an element of co-production in the design of this, but I think that's yet to be seen. And I wonder if you could tell us who is going to be primarily responsible for the delivery of local action plans, so we know where to direct our scrutiny outside this chamber.
Well, let me say that I am responsible for the delivery of the plan as a whole, and you can scrutinise me on that. But let me say, Bridgend County Borough Council have been very quick to tell me what their expectations are of me as well. I don't think there's so much a sense of me telling them what I wanted from them. They were certainly very anxious to tell me what they expected of me, and I'm grateful to the member for Ogmore, who facilitated many of those conversations and who facilitated the meetings that we had to discuss those issues. We had a very, very successful public meeting in my stag where we led a long conversation with people from those valleys about how we want to see the strategic hub in North Bridgend develop into the future. And I hope that members will continue to scrutinise me on the delivery of the Valleys Task Force project and plan. I can see there's a great interest in that this afternoon. We had hoped, of course, to hold a government debate on this matter earlier in the month, and perhaps that's something I will reschedule for the new year.
Question 5, Lee Waters.
Question 5, Lee Waters.
What assessment has been made of the impact of automation on the delivery of public services?
There are significant opportunities for digital to support service transformation in public services in Wales. Consideration of digital or automated solutions should be built into the development of new policies or services.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, and can I welcome you to your new role. The most recent Public Policy Institute for Wales report for the Welsh Government predicts that a third of Welsh jobs are projected to be impacted by automation. But would the Cabinet Secretary agree that automation isn't something that in technology present opportunities for public sector innovation and improvements in service delivery, freeing up people from routine tasks to deliver better public services? But of course there are private sector companies trying to tout it as a way of cutting jobs. So to avoid hard-pressed councils from taking an ad hoc approach, would the Cabinet Secretary agree a strategic approach is needed, and will he commit to a review of how local authorities can be supported to use automation for the improvement of public services and ensure they are equipped to meet the challenges ahead?
Can I say, Presiding Officer, I'm very happy to do that. I'm very happy to look at how our public services can deliver through digital and ensure that those opportunities are maximised. I'd be very happy to continue a conversation with the member if he has ideas on how that might be achieved. I know he interviewed the Permanent Secretary on this matter in Public Accounts Committee last month, and I hope that she was able to assure him, alongside the Chief Digital Officer of the Welsh Government, Karen Fullerton, that the Welsh Government is and has a delivery plan on this matter for public services remit. But clearly, if local authorities will be delivering services that they are responsible for, and if the member wishes to continue a conversation on that matter, I'd be very happy to continue that with the member concerned.
David Melding.
Cabinet Secretary, it's clear that automation is going to extend to the professional classes as well, such as doctors and many working in the health sector, but also others giving professional advice or advice through local authorities and the civic sector in general. I think what's important is that much of this will offer a great way to complement those services, basically allowing people to have more time with professionals that they interface with, and for those professionals to put the information, the diagnostic information, for instance, that they're getting from AI into a context, and then the follow-up work and ensuring the well-being of that person is foremost in whatever service they're getting. So I'm not sure it's going to devastate job prospects for everyone, but it will need new protocols and very careful training in how to use this new technology, and that's something, if we want efficient public services, we must be very much aware of.
Well, I very much agree with the member's observations. I will say I see the digital opportunities as a means of extending, deepening and broadening the opportunities we have to serve the public and to enable the public to access services more easily than is possible at present. And I would urge all service providers to look at how they can positively and proactively approach service delivery to ensure that both we expand digital services currently available, but do so in a way which doesn't exclude those who are unable to access such services.
Question 6.
Question 6, Vicky Howell.
What are the Welsh Government's priorities for supporting members of the armed forces community and their families in Wales?
Presiding Officer, I understand that you have given permission for questions 6 and 7 to be grouped. Our priority is to ensure we provide effective services that meet the needs of service families in areas such as health, housing and employment. Examples of these are the housing pathway, Veterans NHS Wales, and the development of an employment pathway for service personnel leaving the forces as well as veterans.
I'd like to thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for your answer and join others in congratulating you on your new role. RCT Council recently received a Gold Award from the Ministry of Defence for its commitment to its armed forces community. It's the first and so far the only council in Wales to do so. Will you offer your congratulations to RCT, and how will you promote this best practice across Wales?
I'm grateful to the member for her kind remarks, and I'm sure all of us will join you in congratulating RCT Council in their award. I know it's a prestigious award which recognises the outstanding support that the Council has given to our armed forces community. I'm sure everybody's very proud of the work that RCT does, and I'm sure that we would wish to extend our congratulations. In terms of extending best practice, I hope that the conversation that we had during the debate on our armed forces last week would be a means of delivering that sort of best practice across the whole of Wales. We do have a strategy and a programme for doing this, and I will speak to my officials to ensure that the best practice we have observed in RCT is included in that, and as others across the country have an opportunity to share in that best practice.
Darren Miller.
Cabinet Secretary, one of the recommendations in the report that we discussed last week was the suggestion that Wales ought to have an Armed Forces Commissioner in order to identify the sort of best practice that Vicky Howell's just referred to, and to ensure that that was shared widely across the country and that people were held to account for their delivery against the Armed Forces Covenant. I'd be grateful to know whether this is something that, that you, as the Minister responsible for the Armed Forces, will consider putting in place here in Wales, because I think it would give the veteran community and our armed forces family here in Wales some confidence about the continued commitment of your government to the armed forces.
Presiding Officer, in replying to the debate last week, I gave an undertaking that I would consider all the recommendations of the cross-party group with an open mind. I reiterate that undertaking this afternoon. I've also agreed to attend a meeting of the all-party group on the armed forces, and I reiterate again my commitment to doing that and to continuing the conversation that we started last week on how we continue to support the armed forces and veterans community in this country.
Cabinet Secretary, may I also welcome you to your role. We owe a huge debt of gratitude to our armed forces. The best way of repaying that debt is to... So therefore, Cabinet Secretary, how do you plan to strengthen the Armed Forces Covenant in Wales to ensure that we support our serving personnel in every possible way, and that they and their family have priority access to public services?
The delivery on the Covenant was something I debated last week, and I'm happy to reiterate the points I made last week. The Covenant isn't simply delivered by a speech or by a gesture or by a debate. It's delivered by public service workers and the whole community, day in, day out. We ensure that we monitor the delivery of commitments and the commitments that we've made, and ensure that people are able to access exactly the services that the members outlined day in, day out. I'm grateful to all members who took part in the debate last week. I'm also grateful to the work of the all-party group that both scrutinises government in an informal way on this matter, but also seeks to identify all the areas where there is a belief or a view that the government needs to improve its service delivery and has further work to do. Last week I accepted that I would look at all of the recommendations of that all-party group report with an open mind. I've already reiterated that commitment this afternoon, and I will attend another meeting of that group in order to continue this conversation.
Mick Antonev.
Secretary, one of the areas of concern I have about the support that we give
relates to that of residential care. I mean, I have an ex-serviceman in my constituency who's done numerous tours in Northern Ireland and various parts of the world, significantly suffers from post-traumatic stress, but he's had no success in finding residential care place that he needs locally, only being offered places in Shropshire and Scotland, and again, not that those are actually funded. So I was wondering if there was a possibility of reviewing the provision of services in order to ensure that every ex-service person that needs residential support can actually have it and get it when they need it locally, or if it's not available locally, that there would be some funding mechanism to support it elsewhere.
The member makes a very good and important point. It's a point that's also been made by the member for the Cannon Valley. I accept the point that he makes. Current research points to community-based treatment close to an individual's home and community is the most effective method of treatment. The member will be aware that earlier this month the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Services announced an additional £100,000 of recurrent funding on top of nearly £600,000 that the Welsh Government provides annually to fund the Veterans NHS Wales. This provides additional support and care for veterans with dedicated veteran therapists located in each health board area. They offer a range of evidence-based psychological therapies for a range of common mental health problems to improve the mental health and well-being of veterans in Wales. If the member is concerned that that isn't currently delivering for the constituent that he is referring to, then I'd be grateful if he could write to me and I'd be happy to take that matter forward.
Mohammed Ashkar.
I also congratulate Cabinet Secretary of his new post. The thing is, as there were last week debates, you know, there was post-traumatic syndromes in the veterans, and also you just mentioned mental health issue in armed forces veteran is pretty common, and we have to look after them. I know you have not closed the door on the idea of creating Armed Forces Commissioner in Wales to coordinate and provide the support they need from public sector organisations. So could I ask you to commit to making a statement on this issue in the early new year, please?
Presiding Officer, I've given an undertaking that I'll discuss this matter with the all-party group, and I will certainly make a statement to the National Assembly after I've had an opportunity to have those discussions with the group.
Rhiannon Passmore.
Cabinet Secretary, will you agree with me that there was no greater champion from the Senedd of our armed forces than Carl Sargent? As Cabinet Secretary of Communities and Children, Carl last year outlined in the Chamber Welsh Government action to support our armed forces and veterans, such as the innovative housing referral pathway to ensure former members of the armed forces community are supported to find suitable accommodation and avoid homelessness, a devastating seeming outcome of armed service. The Keep Safe Cymru for Veterans, a creative and highly valued initiative which allows veterans with specific health need additional support from emergency services in times of crisis. Cabinet Secretary, what actions, therefore, will the Welsh Government take to build on Carl's passionate work and legacy in this area to ensure that we continue to value our ongoing duty of care to those who have given their all, our veterans and their families, and continue to play our part in the repayment of a collective debt and duty to them?
Presiding Officer, I think members across the whole Chamber paid tribute to the work of Carl Sargent during our debate last week, and I was certainly very happy to add my voices to those tributes. Carl, in many ways, led the work of the whole government on this area, and the fact that Wales is recognised as the leading country in the United Kingdom in terms of providing support to veterans and service families and the service community is testament to the work that Carl led. I will say to the member, we'll continue to work with the expert group that was established to ensure that we are able to respond to all the issues which are raised by the service community in this country, whether it's the health issues that have been raised this afternoon or other housing issues or employment issues that have been raised on other occasions. We will work with our key partners, Forces Covenant, consistently across the whole country throughout the whole year.
Diolch i'r ysgrifennydd.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The next item is the topical questions, and the first question is from Russell George.
Presiding Officer, given the announced 23% overspend on between Abergavenny and Hirwaun,
will the Cabinet Secretary confirm where the additional resource to fund this will come from?
Yes, the increased expenditure is spread over 3 financial years between now and the end of construction, and future budget profiles will reflect these increases.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for your answer. We've heard from businesses, of course, who will face a financial difficulty due to delays, and there are the obvious frustrations and inconvenience to residents. Can I ask, when did you become aware that the project would likely to go into an overspend situation? What provisions were made by the Welsh Government to cover potential cost overruns of the scheme? And also, if the Welsh Government is liable for a proportion of the total cost of the overspend, what is that proportion? And if you don't know what that figure is, then can I ask why not? And how was a procurement contract agreed for a project of this scale without your government protecting taxpayers from an overspend, which they're not responsible for if that's the case? In addition, I want to ask what independent technical advice was sought by the Welsh Government in relation to many of the complex challenges associated with the scheme, importantly, before the tendering specification was drawn up.
I'd like to thank the member for his questions, and I've already said to members previously that I'd welcome any referral of businesses or indeed individuals or self-employed people who are suffering as a consequence of the roadworks on this particular stretch to be brought forward to government with a view of us assisting. I can say that I was, at the moment that I was informed of the ambitious scheme, of commercial review, which has now reported back. I can confirm as well that officials took specialist and commercial and legal advice on these matters, and the resolution and negotiation of such issues is a confidential and commercially sensitive process. But the contract is absolutely clear. The contractor is currently exposed to a greater level of financial risk from the overspend than Welsh Government. Their financial exposure should motivate them to reduce their level of risk. I'll outline the process by which we entered into a contract with Costain, and this is a hugely significant engineering and construction project, but I don't think there's any hiding my disappointment at the contractor's overspend and programme delay. We used the early contractor involvement process and also industry standards, terms and conditions, in order to ensure that Welsh Government's exposure to risk was reduced as much as possible. And the ECI approach is intended to bring in, at a very early stage, a contractor's expertise of buildability, ability to innovate, and approach to effective management of risk in order to influence design development. I think it's fair to say that a complicated scheme such as Section 2 of this project is, in theory, very well suited to an ECI contract. But there was also a hold point in the contract between Parts 1 and 2, which enabled either Welsh Government or the contractor to terminate the contract without penalty. It enabled Costain not to enter into the construction contract without penalty should they have felt that, based on all of the information that they held, their projected outturn cost would not be realistic. That said, Costain went ahead regardless, and I am determined that we will do everything that we can to protect taxpayers from the additional costs which we are assessing currently. I think it's worth saying that we are satisfied that we have exercised the appropriate level of management and supervision on this project. Construction has already seen 2 million tonnes of earth and rock moved, 2.5 kilometres of retaining wall built, 44 service diversions completed, over 6,000 soil nails installed and 4,000 trees planted. And whilst significant, these shorter-term impacts need to be balanced against the longer-term benefits of this incredible project. I would encourage members as well to attend the public exhibitions which commenced on November the 27th, and to take part in site tours where more questions can be asked and where they will be answered.
Nick Ramsey.
I think no one would disagree that this is a very challenging engineering project, fine stretch of road when it's complete, but nonetheless there are, I think some of their fears would have been confirmed by the recent revelation about the 23% overspend. For a long time now there have been complaints made to me about costing, about the constructors operating within a slacker fiscal regulatory environment than local residents would see fit. So I think if you could revisit this and your arrangement with the cost, and I hear what you say about saying that they are more liable to bear more of the risk than the Welsh Government is, and that's to be welcomed if that's the case. But currently, certainly in the local area, there are real concerns that there doesn't seem to be the sort of tight hold on the finances of this project, and indeed on the deadlines for completing the project that we would all like to see. So if you could review that, that would be very appreciated.
No, I'd agree with the member. I've already asked for a lessons learned analysis to be conducted by officials. I think the call for tighter regulatory controls over the costs of this project are fair, and also I'd agree with the member that this is a particularly fine piece of road. In fact, it's going to have the biggest concrete arch of its kind anywhere on the planet. It will be a project that we can be proud of. I do sympathise with all of those people who are suffering as a consequence of delays, but it will be a major construction project that Wales will be proud of.
Andrew R.T. Davis.
Presiding Officer. It does seem as if interest in this particular scheme is coming from these benches, given it's the biggest capital spend that the department has at the moment, and the cost overrun running into excess of somewhere north of £50 million is something that has to be managed. I do welcome the Minister's engagement today, and it is sad that he didn't give an oral statement when this first became a problem. I would ask the Minister if he could confirm whether he is confident that whatever proportion of the overspend will have to be met by his department, and he's indicated it will be spread over 3 years, that additional monies will be secured from Welsh Government reserves rather than the existing budgets have to be hollowed out to make up this overspend, because other projects around Wales, and I look at my own area in South Wales Central, which has a consultation at the moment about improving links to the M4, and also proposals around the Dinas Powys bypass, such projects, if these many millions of pounds have to be sent for the completion of this road, could be called into question.
Can I thank the member for his question? Just remind members again that this huge undertaking will open up the heads of the valleys for further economic development and prosperity. It's our intention, first of all, to minimise exposure to the Welsh Government and therefore to taxpayers as a consequence of the excessive costs. But once the level of Welsh Government's liability has been confirmed, decisions will then be made on how best to fund any shortfall, recognising what the opportunity cost of this increase will be. Future budget profiles will reflect these increases so that the impact can be considered as part of the ongoing delivery of the National Transport Finance Plan.
Diolch i'r ysgrifennydd Cabinet.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The next question is from Bryn Ap Iorwerth. Thank you, Llywydd. Will the Cabinet Secretary make a statement on the impact of the recent floods on Anglesy's road network?
Disruption was caused to the road network over the night of the 22nd to 23rd of November due to flooding. We continue to work hard and invest significant resources to build resilience in the network across North Wales.
Thank you very much. May I, on behalf of the Assembly, send my sympathy to everyone who was affected by the floods. I visited most of the areas affected, and it is heartbreaking to see the impact on homes, the pain and anxiety caused for people, many of them vulnerable, and businesses have suffered. Becws Glandŵr in Llangefni, for example, couldn't bake for the first time in 40 years. There are many elements of the floods where I'll need to be in touch with government and its agencies in terms of flood prevention. I'll be in touch with NRW and so on, but I am pleased to have this opportunity to specifically discuss the damage caused to the A545 between Menai Bridge and Beaumaris and the long-term impacts of that. Now, I do want to congratulate the Council for responding quickly. I spoke to engineers on Friday, as they carried out emergency works in order to try and reopen that road, and that was on a very steep slope which went directly to sea. Now, I do very much hope that one lane of the two will be open soon, because at the moment there is no road open for all vehicles to travel to Beaumaris at all. It's possible for cars to use back roads, but I've spoken to businesses who have to travel with vans to meet lorries that deliver goods to them, but can't get to Beaumaris at all because of low bridges into the town. Now, there have been many landslides on this particular road in the past, but they were landslides onto the road from above. At this time, it's been a landslide from the road towards the sea, and that is far more serious because it threatens the foundations of the road itself. And in the past, I've drawn the government's attention to the fears that works need to be done to strengthen this road substantially to safeguard it for the future, and the costs are going to be significant. So may I appeal on government to see what financial support can be provided to Anglesey Council, first of all, in order to put right the damage caused by these floods. That's likely to be £250,000, but also to do the strengthening work required for the long-term resilience. Beaumaris and the east of Anglesey can't afford to be isolated in this way, and without investment now and support from government, I fear that that is what will happen more and more often in the future.
Can I thank the member for his question, Presiding Officer, and add my sympathies to those who were affected by the floods, not just the motorists who were largely featured in the media, but also the many businesses and homeowners who were affected by recent floods. The member was right to outline that the A545 is a responsibility of the Isle of Anglesey Council, but my officials have already met with the local authority to discuss possible ways of improving the road's infrastructure and its resilience, and I've been in correspondence with the local authority with regard to the landslip experienced on the 454. I'm pleased to be able to say that I have already confirmed my willingness to consider a request for financial support to address such problems, and I also understand that the local authority are having discussions with Beaumaris Town Council on a possible improvement that could be partly funded as well by the Town Council. Between all of us working together, I hope that we will be able to bring greater security to the people of Beaumaris and indeed Anglesey, and ensure that future floods do not affect people in the way that these floods recently have done.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The next question from Darren Miller.
Diolch Llywydd. What consideration has the Cabinet Secretary given to commissioning an independent inquiry into allegations of abuse on Caldy Island?
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Any allegations of abuse are truly abhorrent, and survivors were not given the response they deserved when they first spoke out. We would advise anyone who suffered abuse to come forward in confidence and report allegations of abuse to the police by ringing 101, or to contact local authority social services, or indeed the Truth Inquiry on 0800 917 1000.
Cabinet Secretary, thank you for that response. Like you and everybody else in this chamber, we were appalled and shocked at the allegations which have emerged in recent weeks of abuse by a monk on Caldy Island. 11 women so far have come forward to say that they were abused by Father Thaddeus Kotick when they were children. And, of course, they are all suffering lifelong consequences as a result of that abuse. In fact, one of those women claims that a second person also abused her on that island. Who that person is and where they are, we don't actually know, and we know that other cases may well come to light, and I too would encourage people to report their concerns. We also know that allegations of abuse, of course, were brought to the attention of the abbot at Caldy Abbey back in 1990, but were not reported to the police at that time. And that since that date, a child sex offender, Paul Ashton, hid on Caldy Island for a period of 7 years, trying to evade justice. And I have to say, I think the whole thing stinks. It smacks of a cover-up, a deliberate cover-up of abuse by clergy on that island, which is frequently visited by young children, a place which ought to be safe, which hasn't been safe in the past. And I think we need answers. We need answers as to who knew what, when, and why the Abbey didn't report things to the police when they ought to have done when things were brought to their attention. We also need to know when Pembrokeshire Social Services Department knew about these claims and what action they may or may not have taken in the past to protect young children actually visiting that island. I'm appalled by this, and I think that it would be wise to ask you to organise an independent inquiry into what went on, because we do need to learn lessons, and we need to be confident now, particularly given that we don't know who this second person is, that young children are safe visiting that island in the future. School trips are still going on, Cabinet Secretary, and we need to be sure that those children are protected from abuse.
Thank you for those additional comments. And can I say that in light of the recently emerging allegations and fresh allegations, Dyfed Powys are currently engaged in ongoing investigations into these allegations. And as such, I hope you'll understand, Darren, it's not appropriate for me to comment further at this moment because of the risk of jeopardising the police investigations and inquiries. But members will also note that the Children's Commissioner has written to Corley Island themselves to seek assurances, but also that she has said it is at this moment too early to call for an inquiry, not least because of the detail that is still emerging and also because there is a police investigation currently live underway. It is worth pointing out, however, that in addition to the massively transformed safeguarding environment for children and adults within Wales, there is also a National Catholic Safeguarding Advice Service. And as I mentioned, the Children's Commission has written directly to the Abbey on Corley Island, seeking assurances that they are following the Catholic Church's national safeguarding policy, their own safeguarding policies as well, and their procedures on child protection. Darren is absolutely right in saying we need answers to this. We need to know how this happened, but also to learn. It's often an overused phrase, but it is to learn lessons about how we can avoid this or minimise the risk in happening again. We have done so much in Wales in improving our safeguarding procedures. Also in terms of wider safeguarding, we will ensure that we learn those lessons. And in that respect, I fully understand the calls for the answers to the questions that have been